Welcome. The title for today's sermon is Growing Up in the Family. It'll be by Pastor Kevin Oates. The scripture for today's sermon is taken from Genesis 37, 1 to 11. So if you would turn with me in your Bibles and read along with me, we'll start in Genesis 37, the first verse, and read through to the 11th verse. And again, I'll be reading from the New King James Version. Genesis 37, 1 to 11. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was, a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the genealogy of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the son of Bilhah and the sons of Zephah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them, to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him even more, and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and at this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come and bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. And all God's people said, Amen. And now for the sermon, Pastor Kevin Oates.
You are tuning into our Goodwood Baptist Church YouTube channel. And this has been exciting days for us as we try to work through these things. And it's been good. I hope that you're doing well as you listen to this, that this social distancing and self-distancing, and maybe there are those that are listening that have been quarantined or have been kind of a little bit just by themselves. And I hope that these messages will bring encouragement to you as we listen and learn lessons from the life of Joseph. Many of us come from different families, different sizes of families. We have 2 daughters in our family, and both of them have distinct personalities and are very good and very much a blessing to both my wife Margaret and I. They're both serving on the mission field and in different countries, and dealing with life in different ways at this point. Now, they are like a family. My wife came from a family of 1 brother and 2 sisters, and so that was a distinct family. I came from a family of 9 children, 9 or 10 children, 6 sisters and 4 or 3 brothers, so there was 10 of us, and that was a whole different set of dynamics. And so life in the family can be difficult at times, and those interpersonal relationships and how one is treated over the other, and some of the commonness that can happen in families is there is a tendency sometimes to bring favoritism in, or to treat them differently, or not like them, and so out of that comes reactions of hatred and anger and other things. And so this morning, as Dennis has read the first 11 verses of chapter 37 of Joseph, we've moved ahead from chapter 30, when he was born, to about when he was about 17 years of age at this point. And life was different. Life was difficult in some ways, but there's some things that happened. So this morning in our message, we're going to look at some of those things. Now, there are two basic interpretations of Joseph. One is that Joseph was a normal boy who sometimes would do things that sometimes make people angry, because he would tattletale, or he was, or a boy who would, was being favored by his father, so he would kind of hold that over the brothers. We're going to look at that a little bit this morning, but we're also going to look at, some of the characteristics of Joseph, and some that would build him so that God could use him in the future. We're going to look at that this morning in this passage. As we go through this and see that Joseph was different from his brothers, I want to show you here that we also could be a light in the middle of a dark and dying world. People are going to look at us differently now. They're going to look at us in so many different ways. And so how we walk these days, people are watching. There are those that are watching, see if we're doing social distancing these days, and there's a number that you can call if you want to report someone that's breaking those rules. And so it's very common to what we see in Joseph's life. And so as we have looked at those first 11 verses, we're going to take those 11 verses in a different way. There's also, because we see in the life of Joseph how someone can live above the circumstances that he's living in, above the dysfunctionalness of the family. Joseph grew to be the person that God wanted him to be. That was difficult. The brothers made choices themselves. Some of them not good choices. Some choices that would bring ridicule and would be harmful to the name of Jacob. And so this was something that had to be dealt with. But what we can also see, that this godly man grew up in some of the roughest of conditions. I'm still amazed that God could take a young man from such a background and use him as he did. And that's why I've taken the interpretation I have about how God can use him, because God would then mold him to be the person that God needed him to be. See, this gives me a hope as a parent, as a pastor, as a person today. If God can do that with Joseph, then he could take my children and use them. He could take your children and use them, and your grandchildren and use them. If he can do that with Joseph, and the circumstances that are tough, even with what we're going through today, and all the terribleness and loss of life, and all the statistics, and the loneliness, and the strife, and those that are working extra hours because they're being on the front lines, all of that God can use for his glory. As we continue to consider the verses in the Bible that speak about the life of Joseph, we're going to see how different he was from the rest of his family. It is astounding that a young man who grew up in the same home, the same condition, the same environment as his brothers, could be so different. I believe part of that goes back to the story of Jacob, when he met and wrestled with God and came out of it not the same person. Man that was limping, a man that met with God, and that made him make some differences, where he had a Bethel, where he had an altar before God, where he was willing to be what God wanted him to be. Unfortunately, it didn't change how he reacted to his family, and he will make some changes or some differences there that we will see a little bit later. One of the first qualities that we see in Joseph's life is that there's a purity of Joseph's life. One of the most striking ways Joseph was different from his brothers was that he desired to live differently. Every time you see Joseph, he's doing the right thing. Now, some will say, no, he wasn't, and they will look at some, and I've looked at many books and scholars that will say, well, no, he was a tattletale and he was proud and he needed to, but how did God use those things? And was he a tattletale? And was he proud? What we see is that he was different from his brothers. He was different. The brothers were men that made their own choices, whereas Joseph chose purity and integrity. And a desire to do the right thing at all times marked the life of Joseph. And we see that in the next coming weeks as we look at some of the other areas of his life. Verse 2 brings us face to face with the holy heart that beats inside the chest of Joseph. Verse 2 says, this is the history of Joseph. Now I find that interesting. We're talking about Jacob. But his whole life revolved around his son, his 11th son, Jacob. Jacob, a man who, yes, who was a deceiver. Yes, who made different types of rules and different types of things, and he would with his mother deceive his father, and then other times he would deceive his father-in-law and make it so that he had all the good sheep, and became very prosperous on that. Then he met God, and that changed his life. Another area that changed his life was when his 11th son was born, Joseph. And that's what we see here. Being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bahad and the sons of Zilpah, sorry, I'll get that. And his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his brother. Now, that's the details we have of this scene. And some people say, well, why did he tattle? Well, Joseph saw in what was happening with his brothers, the four sons of the two handmaids of his mother's, Leah and Rachel, that basically he could not hold back. For they were doing something that would bring dishonor to the name of Jacob in that area. And so that's what we see here. They basically, the impression is the first time that Joseph had been sent out to work with these men, he was kind of given the responsibility, go and see what they're doing. Now, maybe Jacob had heard something and wanted to double check, but when Joseph came back, it was not a good report. It was a bad report. And so there were other things that these brothers were doing. And so it came back that now Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now, the sons of Jacob were not always known for making wise choices. There was always things that we're doing. If we would take the time over the next few weeks to look at the verses of chapter 34, 35, and 30, right through, we're going to be looking at 37, we see such things as murder in Genesis 34:25, incest, Genesis 35:33. There was hatred. We see that in Genesis 37:4. We'll look at that in a few minutes. Genesis 37:11, enslaving their brother. Genesis 37:38, lying. Genesis 37:31-33, immorality. Genesis 38:12-18. We see that immorality is real. And so we see in the brothers, not bad choices, not good choices, bad choices. Choices that made them really stand out, not as good examples of who were going to be the leaders in Jacob's family, but sons that were not honoring their father. So here's the situation. whatever they were doing, these four sons of the handmaidens, they were doing it in a way that would bring dishonor on Jacob. The problem, because Jacob told, was it brought strife and hatred against him. This event surely caused problems between Joseph and the rest of his brothers. It may have been the seed plot where the root of bitterness in the hearts of the brothers began to grow. Some authors have accused Joseph of being a talebearer. They believe that Joseph brought about the hatred of his brothers because he acted like a goody two-shoes. Now, nobody likes a goody two-shoes. But the problem is that, was he really? That's what it was. In reality, Joseph displayed absolute integrity in going to his father with the evil report concerning his brothers. Now, some lessons we can learn from this, some areas that we can see. Joseph had a responsibility to his father. He saw that. Whatever his brothers were doing, it involved the good news of Jacob in the area. He needed to know what was going on with his sons. Joseph did the right thing when he went to Jacob and told him about the evil deeds of his brothers. See, there are some lessons we can learn. How did Joseph do this? Did he go to the other brothers and tell them about it? No, he went to Jacob. Every one of our lives should be a mark of purity. The God we serve is a holy God, and he expects his people to be a holy people. He wants us to stand separate from the world and its evil ways. He wants us to be different. We should be different in the way we act, talk, and live our lives. Purity should be the hallmark quality of our life. It isn't easy, but we should always strive to do the right thing in every situation. Our lives should be marked by integrity. There are plenty of people who are willing to do the wrong thing, especially if it makes life easier for them. But we should always do the right in spite of the personal cost. It would have been easier for Joseph to just cover up what his brothers were doing. It would have been easier still to have joined them in their sin. But he was determined to do the right thing, even if it cost him everything. It's easy to tell a little white lie to keep the heat off your life. Don't do it. Tell the truth. It's easy to cheat a little here and there to make things easier for yourself. Don't do it. Always be above board in all your dealings. It's easy to cut corners at school and at work where you would fit into it with the crowd. Don't do it. Do the right thing. It's the best. One other lesson we can do with the proper use of the tongue. See, we should never be guilty of being a talebearer. If there is something you just must tell, be sure that you tell the right person. Jacob had a right to know what they were doing. Joseph told him and him alone. That's what the verse says. He went and told his father. He told his father in an effort to stop evil. A gossip always tells the wrong person. If you must tell something, always tell the truth. They were not trying to stop evil, but to spread it. See, it's just what Joseph did. He did not embellish the facts. He simply told things as they were. Gossips love all the added on, subtract from the details as it suits their agenda. The other area that we'll look at this morning is the promotion of Joseph's life. Joseph had a relationship with dad was really real. These verses 3-4, says, Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also he made a tunic of many colors. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. This is a very important part that we see here. See, these verses tell us a little about the atmosphere where the home of Joseph. It seems clear that Joseph was guilty of favoritism in his relationship with his children. We are clearly told that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children. Jacob should have known better than to do this. After all, he grew up in a home that was rampant with favoritism. The favoritism brought envy and strife and trouble into that home. Parents and any age should be careful that they do not favor one child over another. Children should be treated as equals as far as that is possible. Jacob's choice of Joseph did not result purely from a desire to elevate him above his brothers. It appears from the text that Jacob had chosen Joseph to be the head of the household on his death. This is indicated by two statements. Because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Let's consider these two statements in greater detail. The phrase, because he was the son of his old age, can refer to the fact that Jacob was 91 years old when Joseph was born. He had waited many years on a child from his beloved wife, Rachel. And when Joseph was born, his heart's desire was realized. But there is another possibility. The phrase can also be translated because he was a right head on a young shoulders. See, this might mean that Jacob saw wisdom and strength of character in Joseph that was missing in the rest of his sons. Jacob is 108 years old when this event takes place. He does not know how much longer he will live. He needs one of his sons to take over when he dies. The oldest son, Reuben, disqualified himself when he committed incest with Jacob's concubine. The oldest son of Bilhah and Zilpah, the handmaids, would not have been his choice. The only choice that remained was Joseph, the eldest son of his favorite wife. He also told him that Jacob made Joseph a coat of many colors. He also seemed a picture here of a striped jacket that screamed, "I'm special. Father loves me more than he loves you." You know, we've seen this Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat and all the majesty and colorness of that. But this was a special type of garment. But it was a multicolored and heavily ornamented. It would have been sleeves that reached all the way to his hands, and the hem of his garment would have reached to his ankles. It marked the wearer as a chieftain, as the head of the clan. This type of garment was not worn by a common worker. It was only worn by the overseer and royalty, those who were above the work. This garment was worn by the heir. And when Jacob gave his coat to Joseph, it identified him as his father's choice to be the replacement as the head of the family. It identified him as the superior son in the family. That coat told the other brothers, "You don't report to Jacob any longer. You work for Joseph now." This is a big deal in the family of that era. The head of the household literally held absolute life and death authority over the members of the family. When the brothers of Joseph saw us wear this garment, they knew exactly what they were stood in the pecking order with the family. Joseph carried himself well, and he earned the respect of his father. As the time went on, his father gave him more and more responsibility with the family. It carried himself so well and proved himself to be so trustworthy that his father appointed him to the heir of this place as head of the family. By the way, this position would have entitled Joseph to a double portion of his father's inheritance. All of this attention from Jacob toward Joseph created jealousy amongst his older brothers. In fact, we are told they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. The word hate is a very strong word. It is the idea of a person or things that are detested and despised and with which one wishes to have no contact or relationship. The brothers of Joseph wanted nothing to do with him at all. They could not even say shalom when they met him. They didn't have any kind word for Joseph. In fact, their hatred grew with each passing day, so that it was so bad they wanted nothing to do with him. That's a lot of background from the text. Now let's look at a few points of application before we move on. When we live a life of integrity and holiness, the Father notices. When we are faithful in his service to him, he will promote us to greater in areas of service. We see that in the scriptures in Matthew 25:21. The true character of our heart is revealed in the faithfulness of our service to the Lord. Luke 16:10. When we are promoted, we must not boast about our achievements. Any advancement in the spiritual realm is purely the good grace of God's work in our lives. John 1:26-30. But how do we handle when someone else gets promoted? When others prosper and are promoted, we must guard against becoming jealous. Instead of being angry that we are progressing, we should be thankful that the Lord is doing what the Lord is doing in our lives. Your true self is revealed in how you respond to promotions, blessings, achievements, and advancements of others. We also see that there was a promise given in Joseph's life. As troubles were brewing in the family, God was working in the life of Joseph. God spoke to Joseph in 2 dreams. And we won't take the time to read of those dreams this morning, but from verses basically 5-11, we see these 2 dreams. And we see the reactions of the brothers to these 2 dreams. Now, this is another one of those areas that a lot of scholars and a lot of people think, well, Joseph was boasting. He had a prideful heart. He look at this. He had to let people know this were the dreams. And there are times I understand that. You know, does it come across as if he was being a boastful young man who you know, through the years, look at me, I'm better than you type attitude. And we have to be careful that we don't give those attitudes and we don't look at people that we're better than them. See, God spoke to Joseph. In these dreams, God revealed one of his plans for Joseph's life. These dreams would become points of Joseph's life that would he could hold on to at a time when everything else was dark. God spoke so that he would know, yes, there's something that God has planned for him. Maybe there's a verse, maybe there's something in your life that God's given you that makes you feel like, yes, I know no matter how bad it is, God's there and God's got a plan. Sometimes that plan doesn't always get revealed right away, but we know that God is there. That's what Joseph was. In these dreams, God revealed to him his plan for Joseph's life. Now, the first dream, in verses 5-8, we see that Joseph and his brothers gathered grain in a field. They were cutting wheat and binding it up in sheaves. And in the dream, Joseph's sheaves stood up, and the sheaves belonging to his brothers bowed down before it. Now, his brothers immediately interpreted this dream, meaning that Joseph would one day rule over them, and they reacted in anger. They did not want Joseph to be the head of the house. They did not want Joseph over them at all. They hated this man. They wanted nothing to do with it. They defied the dream and hated Joseph even more than they had before. In verses 9-11, the second dream consists of the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to Joseph. Now this time, he not only tells his brothers, but he also tells his father, who, as the scriptures will say, then he dreamed another dream and told to his brothers and said, look, I have a dream, another dream. And in time, the sun, the moon, and the stars bowed down to him. And he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him, saying, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. That's very important to understand. See, that's the difference between, is he boasting or is God using this in his life? Is this something God had a message for him? Now, we can argue Joseph probably shouldn't have told him. But I think he was wanting more and more to understand the dream. He was a young man. He probably didn't understand what was happening. And of course, this dream, like the other, caused the rift between Joseph and his brothers to grow even wider. Not only their father obviously chose Joseph over them, but now God is speaking through Joseph. And that's the thing that Jacob brought to mind. See, Jacob had his own dream of angels descending and ascending up to heaven, and is speaking with God and is wrestling with God. And so Jacob understood the dreams and the power of dreams, and that God could be speaking. We can all see these things increasingly jealous of their brother. But we should note that Joseph does not seem to have told his dreams because he wanted to brag or boast. He told them because they were so strange that he needed to share with them with others. See, the dreams are the first indication that God had big plans for Joseph. Eventually, they were completely fulfilled. I would imagine there was these dreams that sustained Joseph through the pain of the pit, Potiphar's house, and the prison. It was these dreams that assured that God had a plan for his life and that eventually everything would turn out all right. So let's look at this. Some points of application here. Here's a word about hope. In his dreams, Joseph received the shadow of a promise from the Lord. He held on to those dreams and they sustained him through trying times. And when Joseph birthed a dream in your heart, God births a dream in your heart, let nothing take it away. Rest assured that God will accomplish in your life all those things that please him in his time. But there's a word about hatred here. When you serve the Lord, live clean and follow the dream God gives you, some people are going to rise up against you. Don't be surprised when you are hated for following the Lord. They hate him and they will hate you. Don't let the world stop you from achieving your fullest potential in the Lord. See, the arrangement that made up Jacob's family, there was really only one flower. Joseph was the rose among thorns. This young man rose to the top, and his life stands as a testimony of what God can do with a life in spite of the difficulties that would seem to hinder his work. Maybe God has placed his finger on some area of your life today. Maybe the problem is the area of your purity. We need to get that to the Lord and straighten it out right now. Maybe there's a jealousy in your life over someone that's had a promotion or someone that's treated better than you. We need to get that straightened out. Maybe you're like Joseph's brothers to others and you need to be saved. Maybe life has interfered with the dreams that God put in your heart and you wonder if they will ever come true. You need to talk to him about that today. Maybe you just want to get to a place of submission to the Father's plan for your life. If he has spoken to you today, please obey him now. May we take this time of self-isolation and maybe a little more time in our lives to spend some time alone with God. Maybe go through the passage again. Maybe read on into Genesis and see how God is working through Joseph's life. Maybe use this time to get closer to God, to be dependent upon him, be faithful. And if there's areas of our life that we need to clean up, may we be faithful. May we clean those up. And may we seek the face of God. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you peace. Amen.